Your clothes are amazing. They're beautiful. And I've been looking at them and I'm so jealous, and it makes me want to take a visit to the Caribbean and just vacation in them. So let's just start off. How has life changed since Project Runway? You're so immersed in the fashion world now. How's that experience going?
It's definitely been a whole new experience for me, because even though I had a clothing line before, I just really never had to deal with as many aspects of the industry because I was doing more custom made stuff, and now I'm approaching a more retail kind of methodology, and so I just it's really overwhelming actually, figuring out how to produce and how to schedule everything on time, and it's become much more about the business and a lot less about the creative side of things.
Okay.
And at the same time, it's really nice to know that I have the potential to build a real brand, and which I didn't necessarily have before. So I'm very happy about that.
So it's kind of like you were in this world before, but you're even more so now. Just a different portion of it.
Yeah, it's sort of like the world opened up, and the direction that I was going in before was a good one. But if I carried on like that, I probably would never have gotten to where I'm potentially going to get to now. So it just means a lot more management, a lot building a team, not doing everything on my own, which is how I was before, and then seeing all the other avenues besides just fashion, because it is reality TV too, so there's like a bigger brand outside of just making clothes.
Just making the clothes. Yeah. So when you're making your clothes, where do you gain your inspiration from?
Oftentimes I do from either traveling and seeing. I really am into the way people dress, like indigenously, and I've always loved to see traditional forms of dress from like ancient times and more sort of tribal types of wear, because I just think that they knew instinctively how to look beautiful, but it wasn't about fashion, and so there was like some balance between beauty and paying attention to aesthetics, but it wasn't obsessed with trends. Or so I'm really into looking back into that time, those different times all over the world. I just find them all very fascinating. And where I come from in the Caribbean, in Trinidad there's a lot of different cultures represented, a lot of different ethnicities, so I grew up with it around me. So I think I just have a natural affinity to want to know more about how people dress traditionally and then take that and modernize it.
Okay, so fashion as kind of like an inborn portion of you, not necessarily going out and saying, oh, I want this. You just kind of develop it over time from what you've been taught and been around your whole life, kind of.
Yeah, like you look at people, let's say, in less modernized countries like Bhutan or some parts of like northern Vietnam that I've been to, and people are still living in tribes, and they're still living according to the tradition that, you know, that centuries of the people have lived according to, and so they dress accordingly. That was a lot of accordings. But they essentially, it's part of everything. It's not just about dress. It's ritual, there's meaning.
Part of their life.
Yes. Oftentimes tribes dress in what we would deem as a uniform, but they deem as a sign or symbolic of their heritage, and I'm fascinated with that. And it's often also just because it's gorgeous, and I love patterns, and I love color, and I love adornment, and they all tend to, most tribal traditional tribal dress has all those three.
So do you also gain inspiration from like the nature of the Caribbean, like the waters and?
Yes, so on the show that was where I drew inspiration for the finale, and I hadn't done that before, but I think under the circumstances of not being exposed to, we weren't allowed to use any books or magazines or anything for the entire competition, and it really taught me how to dig deeper and draw from something within me, and that's naturally where I'm from, and I tend to like to just visit my natural, whatever's instinctive to me, rather than force the issue, because I've had a collection once before in the past where it was really a little bit too heady, and it definitely showed that it was too forced. So I find when I just pick up whatever appeals to me and I make that work, it's more organic, and then
you feel it.
I think the customer feels that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely understand. So, you had said, you had made a clothing line before, and I know you were Miss Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
Has that helped you in your new role as designer and making a brand?
Being Miss Trinidad specifically? Yes. I definitely think, well, there's no question that I started doing my own line because of being in the pageant. Mm-hmm. Because before that I was a graphic designer and I liked it enough, but I didn't love it. And when I went to do the pageant, I got a chance to design some of my clothes, and that really ignited something in me that felt so much more natural. I was so much more passionate about it. Okay. And so in that very direct sense it affected me. And in another way now, I think maybe just being able to speak and like be a spokesperson for things and be comfortable in that role obviously came from some of the training of being a beauty queen. And yeah, there are probably more ways than I even noticed that it's affected how I do things now.
And you were just talking about the training of being a beauty queen, and I know before Project Runway, speaking of training, you weren't really big into sewing. How do you think that's helped you and affected you so far? I mean, you won, so that's great, but were you nervous? How were you thinking about it going in?
Well, I would be lying to say I wasn't nervous. I was very nervous. I remember the first episode when Tim Gunn came into our bedrooms, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. We'd barely even slept from the night before. Mm-hmm. And he says, as soon as we saw him, we knew what was coming. We knew, and Kimberly called it. She just said, I know that tomorrow's going to be a pajama challenge. I'm like, how do you know that? And then he showed up. So that day I was extremely nervous because I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't have a clue. And I think it was do or die, and from that moment on it continued to be do or die. And every time I was, as you know from watching the show, I was always last, I was always rushing, I was always down to the wire. And I don't know, I guess it just became either I was going to do it or I wasn't going to do it, and I was already there, so yeah.
I saw your article and your spread in Marie Claire.
Yes.
So you had an interview and you were quoted as saying that you were having a tough time concentrating when you were doing your final collection, and you said, in your challenges you were down to the wire, and as college students we're frequently procrastinating and having to try to get everything together in the last minute. Do you have any tips on getting things done when they have to be the next day, or like making yourself concentrate? What's your...
Well, I suppose this is why down to the wire works, because the day before a deadline or right a few hours before the deadline, it becomes very obvious that the deadline is right in front of you, and there's no inching around it. If you have 2 days, you have 2 weeks, you kind of say, oh well, there's time, but when it's right there, right?
Yeah.
So I know that's what motivates me, and I've taught myself in some ways to create deadlines for myself, so sometimes that can be a good way in a college environment to set your own deadlines, which you require a lot of discipline to stick to those when no one else is on your back and checking to make sure. But if that kind of situation works for you, like it does for me, there are ways to craft it into your own schedule. And because I just think, for me anyway, I'm not going to do it unless I know it has to be done like in the next 2 hours or tomorrow or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you put music on, or do you shut your windows and your curtains? How do you get away from all the distraction?
For instance, when I was doing the collection, I was doing it in, my parents were rebuilding their home, so my studio was actually set up inside of the construction site, and I was very much alone, and except for drilling in the background. And there's a rooftop, so I would just go to the roof, and like, if I knew like nothing was happening, and I'm sure a lot of people who might read this article or are interested in this story are creative people, and sometimes there is literally such a thing as a block. You can't create, you can't produce, you can't think. And I find, obviously other people have different methodologies, but I just think you just can't force it. So you go for a walk, you go, if you have access to something like a beach or a park, I really find it helpful to not think about the deadline under those circumstances, and let the space open up for yourself, because there is something to be said too for owning your own time, and
Okay.
it doesn't mean like that there's no time for that too.
Mhm.
Because sometimes you force it, it's gonna be terrible anyway. So
It won't be your best.
yeah.
Okay, so again, as you know, students here, sometimes you're so busy doing work and going to a job and you're writing papers. Fashion might not be on the top of people's minds. It's so easy to get into a routine of sweatpants and that kind of thing. An everyday outfit, in your opinion, what can't you go wrong with?
Okay, that's a good question. Obviously, that changes according to the climate,
Mm-hmm.
but black isn't always a go-to color, and as you can tell, sometimes it really works. As much as I love color, black is always what I revert to. You really can't look bad in black. You just you might look a little boring sometimes, but I think comfort on days like that is important. And maybe like my method usually is to distract from, let's say it's a canvas of black, by wearing some piece of jewelry, but just one thing.
Okay.
Like, I don't like to see when people put, obviously they're trying to distract, so they put huge earrings and a huge necklace, and that's not going to work. Because then it's even more confusing of what are you trying to achieve. And I think everybody should have in their wardrobe something that they know they feel good in, even if it means you've worn it 5,000 times before. But fashion and dressing, I think, is really so much about how you feel and less about how you look. Because how you feel affects how you look. How you look doesn't affect how you feel, generally. So, because the perception of what people see is actually how you feel, not
you have to have that confidence when you're walking out in what you're wearing, or even if it's the best outfit in the world, you're not going to like it.
No, and people are going to read your insecurity, not going to read how great you look.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I really think that it's just about that. It's like, what do you have in your closet that just makes you feel great, and the rest of it doesn't matter.
Okay. So do you have any advice for college students looking to expand their personal style? Say they're comfortable in one kind of look. How would you suggest someone, dipping into a different trend? Do you think that they should, look at a celebrity and try to, dabble in that, or how do you personally go into a trend that you've never really got into before? How do you experiment with that?
Well, I found that if I, like, for instance, I used to have long hair, and when I decided I didn't want to look like that beauty queen stereotype anymore, I shaved one side off, and then that led to me changing my style, because all the clothes I was wearing at the time were much more sort of pretty and like, what you associate with a beauty queen.
Okay.
And I just was tired of it, and so shaving my head turned me into, I had to switch up how I dressed because it didn't match anymore. So things like that, I definitely think, not that you have to be so extreme, but it really comes down to experimenting. Like, it's all about instinct. For me, if I look at something and I know that looks like interesting to me and I would like to see how it looked on me, then I just get to try it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay.
Sometimes that's in a magazine, sometimes that's in a movie, sometimes it's someone on the street, especially if you live somewhere like New York. You always see something different. And I guess it's just keeping yourself open to it and trusting in your own taste. And I really believe in having your own sense of style and not copying anyone else's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Thank
for all of your advice.
You're welcome. This is great.
Again, I love all of your clothing, and I'm sure, all the students here are so appreciative for you coming and speaking with us. So
Thank
you so much.
Yeah.